No, I'm ready. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Housing Committee for January 14th. Happy New Year to everybody. This is our first one, right? So we'll have a short meeting, a few items, and we have a very important report, and that'll be the focus of the meeting. Mr. Kretz, I know that you're here specifically for a matter relating to animal supportive services, and we're moving that on the consent item. I know it's very important for you to speak, and you're obviously as a colleague and a friend, so if you want to speak on the matter, you're free to, but you should also know that we're prepared to move that matter on consent.
Well, give me 2 minutes.
Of course.
Mr. Chair, actually, item 1 is the Housing Department has an amendment, and there's also a correction on that item, so we'd actually need to vote on that item. And I'll briefly read item 1 into the record. Item 1 is a Los Angeles Housing Department report relative to authorization to release a RFP for the Housing Opportunities for Persons with HIV/AIDS program.
Great. Okay. And so now can we hear from Mr. Koretz on his concerns on this matter?
That would be the time, yes.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and Mr. Price. PAWS LA has been HOPWA funded for nearly 20 years for its program assisting people living with AIDS who have service animals. And they're really the only organization that has this area of expertise. The new RFP would have eliminated other supportive services as a funded category, which would eliminate any funding category to which PAWS LA might apply. They assist more than 750 low-income people with AIDS countywide. Clients reside in every council district. Their services are unduplicated in the county, and they're the sole source of assistance for this unique population. These services assist clients in maintaining stable housing by removing the financial challenges of caring for their service animals, and thereby eliminating budgetary strain. These services provide AIDS patients with access to emergency and permanent housing by educating them to their ability to possess service animals, even in no-pet buildings. This eases the burden on other HOPWA-funded programs like housing case management and financial rental assistance and use of emergency shelter beds due to the client's more stable housing. They help to educate housing providers on their obligations to make reasonable accommodations to people with AIDS for their service animals. This would dramatically reduce the services to people with AIDS due to lost funding. I could go through the difficulties that this would cause, but I won't because this is already on consent, and it appears these problems would be solved. So I would thank you for modifying the RFP to include the funding for animal support services and the restored category, hopefully housing advocacy and support for people with AIDS for service animals. I appreciate you restoring these critical services for people with AIDS.
Thank you for bringing this to our attention. Thank you, PAWS, for always being there for us. And this is, we can't speak highly enough of this element to the program. It's particularly important, you know, my experience with my wife and our experience with animals during her critical time period. So I commend you for bringing this to our attention. Do we now hear from the department? Yeah, so let's have the department come up and make the amendments. Hi, guys.
Good afternoon. Manny Chavez with HCID. I'm joined by Suzette Flynn, also with the department. Would you prefer to hear an overview of the bid, or would you simply like to hear about the amendment?
Just the amendment. Good.
So the amendment would be to actually revise the final document to include animal support services as a standalone line item, whereby PAWS could actually apply to provide that service on behalf of the city.
Good.
And then the second amendment would be, when we submitted the RFP, we weren't sure about the exact entitlement funding that HOPWA would provide from the federal government, and it's gone up. So we've revised some of the categories in the RFP to give them more money and also to make sure that we have enough to provide the services. So that's
Like
just
that.
what the, pardon?
We like that.
I know, it's unusual. So that's what that is.
Great.
And I think, did you get one? I think there's, so, yes. So if you look at the second chart, it will say what we thought originally we were going to get, then actually what we did get, and what categories will be increased for funding. And then, of course, we will be adding funding for the pet support, too.
Nice. Nice increase.
Yes, it was.
Oh,
Yes, it
okay.
was.
Good. Found money, as they say. Let's hold a second. We can move the item. What's the... Yes. So we want to confirm that we're adding housing advocacy in the amended motion.
That is correct.
Great. All right, we're ready. Ready, Mr. Fuentes? We're ready to move this. This is a consent item.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
did you wish to take the public comment, or,
Oh, yeah, no, I have the cards right here. I'm sorry.
okay.
Okay, we have public comment. You know the status, and we're happy to hear from you. So please come on up if you want to. Ronaldo Maldonado. Hey, brother, how you doing? Come on up. We got Pamela Majet. Pamela, you want to come up and pause? You don't have to, but you can. Winter Spire. Trip LA.
Mr. Chair, since it appears we have quite a few comment cards, our time for public comment will be 2 minutes, 1 minute?
I think 1 minute's good. We know where we're headed here.
Okay.
Okay. And then I have got Sharon Wilson. I know you put cards in. You don't have to come up if you don't want to. And Cynthia Chavez. I got it. Okay, that's for pause, right? Okay. So you're speaking for pause.
Yes,
Okay, so I'm going to pull the other pause cards out. Oh, good. Look at this. Lots of pause presents today. Okay, so we got Mr. Maldonado, Winter, Cynthia, and then Pamela. Okay? Yes, sir.
Okay. Hi.
Hi.
My name. While I'm here to save Paul's LA, I enjoy the program. That there's a lot of things that they help me with. I'm also kind of like a voice for my dog. I'm out here for my pet. Mostly. And I had a lot of when I needed surgery. When my pet needed surgery, the first thing I did was call up Paul's LA, and they helped me with the surgery costs. And I'm a low income person, and it's very hard, to pay for surgeries. I don't want my pet to go to be euthanized because I can't afford the surgery, and so I'm asking you, Councilman Cedillo, to keep the Service Animal Support Program in HOPA RFP. Thank you.
Got it. Thank you, Ronaldo. Or Ronald. Is Winter Spire here? Nope. Okay. And then Cynthia?
Good afternoon. I'd like to thank the
Committee for allowing me to speak today. My name is Cynthia Chavez, and I'm with Safe Refuge, formerly known as the Substance Abuse Foundation of Long Beach. Our agency provides a large number of services, including residential drug treatment services, outpatient drug treatment services, transitional housing services, sober living services, and employment services, among other resources. So I'd like to express our interest in continuing to provide services funded under HOPLA. We do provide services provided through these funds, and we hope to be able to continue to provide these services to the Long Beach community in the upcoming RFP process. So we look forward to that being released in order to continue that process for our agency. Thank you.
Thank you. And Pamela.
Hi, I'm Pamela.
Voice of Paz.
That's right, the Executive Director of Paz LA, and I'm really here just to say thank you to the committee and the Housing Department, and especially Councilman Koretz and his staff for their ongoing support and making this happen and amending the RFP today. So I think I can say thank you on behalf of this room full of Paz LA constituents, and we are very grateful for the support.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Now we can move a motion. Motion moved.
Second.
Second.
The motion should be as amended.
Yes, motion as amended, yes. Are we good to go?
Yes.
Okay.
That takes us to item number 2, which is a adopted budget recommendation instructing the Housing Department to report to the committee with strategies and steps necessary to increase the receipt of HOPLA funding.
Right. Yeah, which... Unless there's any questions, we're prepared to just receive and file.
It would be a note in file, Mr.
Note
Chair.
file. Got to get the right vernacular.
That takes us to items 3. Mr. Chair, would you like me to read items 3, 4, and 5 together, or take them one at a time?
Please.
Item 3 is a housing report and CAO report relative to the Community Services Block Grant Award. Item 4 is a Department of Housing and CAO report relative to the Slauson Wall development. And item 5 is a housing report relative to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Managed Pipeline Plan.
Okay. And those are all on consent, right?
3, 4.
So 5's continued for the 2 weeks. We're not ready for that yet, but 3 and 4 are on consent. Is that a motion?
I'd move the consent calendar.
Okay.
Second.
Second.
That takes us to item number 6. Item number 6 is a verbal presentation by the Housing Department on the Cap and Trade program as it relates to the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities program.
Here we go.
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure that people heard item 5 was not on consent. Item 5 is being continued for 2 weeks? Okay.
And also, item number 4, the recommendations would be in the CAO report that the committee is adopting?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Sure. Sure.
All right, good afternoon, council members. My name is Claudia Monterrosa, and I'm the Director for Public Policy and Research at HCLA. Happy New Year to you. Today I'm here to give you a brief overview of the newly created state-funded program called the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Grant. Before I get into the details, I'd like to say that we have been closely working with Council District 1 and the Office of the Mayor's Office, External Affairs, Housing and Planning over the last 6 months to help shape the guidelines for this new program. Over the last 6 months, we actually have had numerous discussions with the representatives from the Strategic Growth Council, with SCAG, with Metro and other stakeholders that have really influenced in shaping the comments that we have provided to the city. This also includes a citywide working group with various departments such as the building, the BOE, Planning Department, Department of Transportation, the Housing Authority, and others. As I will provide more information later, we have achieved some pretty key changes to the new draft guidelines, but our most significant ask remains unresolved. So how is it that we got here? So before you, I have passed out a PowerPoint presentation to enable us to go as quickly as possible. The brand new draft guidelines were issued last Friday at 6 p.m. and they're over 100 pages long. So I'm trying to synthesize all that information into a handful of slides for you today. The Affordable Housing and Sustainable Community Programs is part of the Cap and Trade program, which was enacted through various enabling legislation beginning in 2008 with SB 375. Some of the most significant legislation that has helped shape this program is SB 535, and last year was SB 862, which actually created this program. And as a point of reference, AB 32 is known as the Global Warming Solutions Act of 2008. The next slide outlines the various programs and the funding sources for the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, which was created under the Cap and Trade program. And there are several programs that were created, but the new one is the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Grant Program. From the proceeds of these of the emission sales, there were over $800 million that were generated, and $130 million were set aside for this new program. 10% of that money is going to affordable housing along TOD, and the other 10% for sustainable communities. The governor recently released his budget, and it's estimated that for the fiscal year in 2015-16 that there's an estimated $1 billion that will be generated for cap and trade proceeds. And since we have 20% of that money, that can potentially mean approximately $200 million statewide for this program. So now I'd like to give you key provisions of the requirements for this program. As I've said, this is a $130 million program, but $120 million will be made available beginning in February of this year. And this is statewide competitive funding. There is a $50 million maximum amount per locality, and that is an issue of contention with a lot of different localities, in particular the city of Los Angeles. The key provisions for this program is to achieve reductions in GHG emissions through increasing accessibility to affordable housing, in particular in disadvantaged communities, via low-carbon transportation options such as walking, biking, and transit. The other provision is to provide grants and affordable housing loans for infill and compact transit-oriented development. It's important to know that by statutory requirements for this particular program and per SB 535, 50% of the AHC funds must be expended in disadvantaged communities, and the other 50% must be expended for affordable housing. These are not mutually exclusive, so a project can be 50%, in the same area, and you can count the same 50% to meet your objective of the 50% for disadvantaged communities. So the next slide for the program, I wanted to outline some of the key changes that we achieved through the advocacy that we have been engaged over the last 6 months. There is a removal of the minimum 100 minimum project size requirement, and now that is reflected in the GHG calculations. There is a streamlining of the transit definitions. This is something that we have been really fighting very hard at the state level. The prior definitions would have disadvantaged the city of LA because of its propensity to build light rail stations. Now with the streamlined definitions, light rail station, rapid bus, and heavy rail are equal and will count for the high qualifying transit areas. There is a provision in there for a no net loss of affordable housing units that applies to all capital projects. There is an anti-displacement criteria. And prior to these revised guidelines, metropolitan organizations, metropolitan planning organizations like SCAG would have had some advantage or some recommended powers to select the projects for each of the localities. So now they actually have an advisory role only. And there is a new definition that was added for vulnerable communities that include permanent supportive housing populations, domestic violence, and a slew of other different types of special needs populations. The remaining key issues is, like I said, the $15 million maximum per locality. We are working with the mayor's office and also with Council District 1 to prepare recommendations so that cap can be eliminated, and that we're hoping that we may be successful on that for this first round of funding. And the other one will be to include cities as a required co-applicant. With the revised application, with the revised guidelines, the cities are no longer a required applicant for these funding sources. And given that a lot of the different eligible uses will require participation either from transit agencies or from city planning departments or from the housing types of agencies, we would like to see city be a required part of the application. There are two eligible project types that were created for which an applicant can apply. One is the transit-oriented development project, and the other one is the integrated connectivity project. For the TOD project, the minimum application amount is $1 million, and the maximum amount is $15 million. For the ICP, is $500,000 and $8 million is the maximum for that. The main key difference between these two programs is that for the ICP, you do not need to have a high qualifying transit station. So if you have a heavy rail or a light rail station that has a 15-minute service, you cannot be an ICP, and if you don't have that, then you can apply for the ICP project. There are some other differences. A TOD project must include a affordable housing development, obviously, and or a housing-related infrastructure or an affordable housing with related infrastructure. For the ICP project, you're not required to have an affordable housing component. And if you do, that has to be located within a 1 mile area. The other thing to note is that for a project area cannot be longer than a mile radius from that transit station. One of the things that's also new in these new guidelines is the revised scoring criteria. Actually, we were previewed as to how these applications were going to be scored. Given that the Strategic Growth Council received over 175 comment letters, they took a little bit longer to come out with their regulations. And based on the feedback, this is the criteria. 55% of the total score will be allotted to GHG reductions and the methodology and how a project can demonstrate that there will be actually a reduction in GHG emissions. 15% of the score will be allotted for project readiness and feasibility, and the other 30% of the total score will be for policy considerations, such as affordable housing and displacement issues, anti-displacement issues, co-benefits, transportation and connectivity, access to employment, and community engagement. Of important note is that the GHG emissions criteria and the methodologies that are being offered right now will only be good for this first NOFA. And we still haven't seen everything that will be required. A lot of this information is still coming forward, and some of that will be made available at the upcoming Strategic Growth Council meeting on January 20th. So we are actually operating on a very tight timeline, and the application process and schedule is really limited. This is a very complex application process, and they are requiring every interested party to propose and to prepare a concept proposal. After that, the Strategic Growth Council, the Housing Development Department, and the NPOs will review these concept proposals, and they will score these proposals based on their criteria in different buckets, and then after that we'll select those applicants that meet the requirements, and they will be invited to apply. So after that, you can only submit a full application after you've been invited. So that's really different from other programs, state funding programs. The next slide is the timeline. It's a very aggressive timeline. These draft guidelines will be heard at the Strategic Growth Council next Tuesday at 1 p.m. in Sacramento. And thereafter, after those are adopted, a NOFA will be released at the end of this month. And workshops and technical assistance will be provided in early February, and concept proposals will be due about a month and a half from now. So we do not have a lot of time to prepare for this, given that a lot of this information was not given to the public prior to this to last Friday afternoon. So that's the timeline. I also passed out a map of the city. This is pretty significant. Per SB 535 and the California Environmental Agency, there was a methodology that was devised to identify disadvantaged communities made up of about 11 factors. Some of them are socioeconomic factors, and the other ones are that include pollutants and other items that would contribute to environmental factors. In the map before you, you have what was established by the Air Resource Board last October of 2014, the approved percentage of the census tracts in the whole city or in the whole state that would have to comply with the guidelines and the different requirements for SB 535 and SB 862. So this map demonstrates the top 25 percentile that will be eligible. In the city of LA, there are 520 eligible census tracts that would be deemed disadvantaged communities, and that makes up 26% of the total in the state. And there are 769 census tracts in the county of LA, which means that the city makes up 68% of that total county in terms of the census tracts. There are a total of over 1,900 census tract at the state level. And so you will see that we have a fairly good distribution of the disadvantaged communities. This is not a good problem to have, but we do have a lot of area where we can have an impact, and we can locate affordable housing along with all these infrastructure-related, transportation infrastructure-related aspects that can be utilized to improve the connectivity, modes of transportation, and accessibility to employment centers and other community assets, as well as affordable housing. Lastly, moving forward, these are some of the key considerations that I think is good for us to consider. One that I mentioned is that we are working on issuing a letter with key recommendations, and that would include the elimination of the $50 million cap per locality and include the city as a required applicant. We're continuing to get feedback from the other departments, but this is being led by the mayor's office and Council District 1. And we're hoping that we can issue a letter sometime in Friday or before the Strategic Growth Council meeting next Tuesday. The next consideration is to immediately coordinate an inner-city department working group to coordinate the application process that includes the following departments: the HCLA, City Planning, BOE, DOT, Bureau of Street Services, Department of Building and Safety, for example. And we have already been working with this, so it will be just calling and reconvening that group. In addition to that, coordinating coordinate the application process with Metro and SCAG so that we are doing that effectively. If Metro is going to be applying, we should coordinate, those applications. And of course, create a city policy to evaluate proposed project applications. How is the city going to handle those interested parties? And lastly but not least is that our department, HCLA, will finalize the managed pipeline guidelines based on the adopted AHC guidelines to ensure maximum leverage for this funding source. So I think that's the end of my overview, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
You always left off the map. Were you in or out?
No, I'm in the map, but
You're in the map.
yeah, no. Chairman Cedillo was sort of talking about that we're always left out, Council District 7, and we have. This is actually really helpful because you could really see sort of citywide the need. My questions are. You mentioned sort of at the outset of your presentation that the City of Los Angeles has an unresolved concern. To me, it seems like the locality limit of $15 million is primarily our
main
issue.
concern, yes.
Is that the case?
Yes.
So the City of Los Angeles makes up 26% of the total of
The entire state.
In the entire state.
That's correct.
So the math would be that we should get about $50 million to address the City of Los Angeles, and the County of Los Angeles should get $140 million of the potentially $200 million that's available.
Right.
So my question becomes, do we know yet that, you mentioned Metro in terms of potential competition and the need for collaboration, but are the guidelines so that the County of Los Angeles could be applying within the jurisdiction of the City of Los Angeles, or do their applications have to be limited to the unincorporated parts of the county?
Unincorporated areas. The city is not a required applicant now, but the city can apply, be a co-applicant. And so to avoid any kind of miscoordination of applications or interest on this, it will be best for us to work with them. And I know that Metro has been closely following this issue and potentially can benefit from this funding sources because a lot of the eligible uses are, creating new transit stations, wayfinding, signs, electric signs, doing right-of-ways, those types of eligible uses.
So, I mean, by definition, they probably have, in their sort of capital improvement lists, projects that really harmonize well with what it is that we're trying to accomplish. So
I'm sorry if I could. The key is that you have to relate those infrastructure projects with an affordable housing development.
And so clearly, the current proposal of $15 million per municipality or locality, it simply isn't fair to Los Angeles on a per capita basis. Your suggestion of writing a letter, is there something else that you're asking the committee to do to exercise its voice in this process? Because the 20th is,
I know the 20th is only a handful of days away. I think the decision-making body, which is a Strategic Growth Council, it's a body of 9 members. 7 of them are appointed by the governor, and 2 of them are appointed are citizen participants. And we do have friends in there. Gail Goldberg is one of the members, and Manuel Pastor was recently added to that. So it will be a matter of perhaps reaching out to those folks and really pushing hard both the city council and the mayor in a unified voice to say $15 million is simply not enough.
But I guess my concern is how do we formally lodge our concern? I know that you all are having communications with them, but next Tuesday's council day, we don't have the sort of official intergovernmental correspondence to them saying, hey, City of Los Angeles,
Mm-hmm.
do we have a letter, a motion, a resolution?
So, do you want to, okay. Go ahead.
No, Friday.
Oh, right.
Point well taken. So this Friday, we'll introduce that motion that puts us on track to.
Okay. I guess my fear is that according to their time frame, they make the decision to adopt their guidelines on Tuesday.
Yes.
And so we're coming to the party potentially.
Well, they have been hearing us for the last 6 months, and we've been saying that very, very poignantly to the Strategic Growth Council and various other decision makers that it is simply not a fair share of the distribution of those funding sources for the city of LA, given the quantity of the number of census tracts that we have.
Sure. Let me change gears a little bit, despite my absolute concern about how effective we're going to be. Because what happens, I'm afraid, in my opinion, is that we get conditioned to a model, and if we don't have it as best as possible at the outset, then we sort of get stuck. But I will remain hopeful. You mentioned that.
We also have the mayor's office here. We can hear from them about our efforts.
Okay, that'd be great. As the mayor's office is coming up, one of the other sort of you mentioned here on the remaining key issues, obviously the per capita sort of limitation against Los Angeles. No, I think you actually answered the question about the obligations. Okay. So what good news do you have for us?
Good afternoon, council members. Kevin Keller with the Mayor's Office, working on planning and housing, and thanks so much for inviting me up. Just wanted to reiterate our collaboration with the council and certainly the housing department. Thank you, Claudia. The $15 million per locality really doesn't address the size and scale of Los Angeles needs. As you've seen on the map of census tracts in need, we have, I think as we just heard, over 25% of the eligible census tracts. So certainly we feel very strongly about that. We have been in dialogue with whoever we can find. We had some calls this morning, and we're working on finalizing a letter in collaboration with some of the council committee's comments today, and then I think having a joint resolution from the council would send a clear message. We also do plan to have, from the mayor's office, our state lobbyist at the hearing up in Sacramento on Tuesday, and I certainly know there's other discussions about possibly popping in. There's a lot going on in Sacramento on Tuesday, but we're doing everything we can on this item. I think we've benefited from a thorough review, and again, the final review just came out on Friday, so Claudia has led the charge here. But there are a number of smaller tweaks which we feel are important, but I think we're like the leadership on the committee here feels want to plug the number one and number two item, which is the $15 million per locality, and secondly, pending the input of this committee, the limit or the requirement that the city is a co-applicant. We do feel it's important to have the city at the table to help vet and allocate these monies the best way. We do have we're lucky in LA to be a sizable locality with a managed pipeline process, and through them I'll be able to vet the best way. So we're looking at that as well, but just wanted to be here and listen and collaborate as best we can.
So your thoughts is that we roll this into the managed pipeline kind of protocols and process?
This is Kevin again. We certainly don't have any thoughts about moving forward. I know one of the things on this committee was how to best talk about queuing up city projects, vetting that. We really look for your leadership on that as well. We want to be as helpful as possible, really focusing right now on the Tuesday hearing date. But I think, once we get through Tuesday, looking at the calendar, there's a very quick NOFA process ahead. So I think how that process rolls out will be very, very key, and certainly the HSID may have.
Who are the 7 other members of the?
I don't have that information before me, but I can certainly send that over to your offices.
Okay. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have public comment on this matter? Any cards?
No public comment on this item. We do have general public comment.
So before we move to general public comment, we want to request HSID to work with the CLA to continue to monitor the AHSC program and to report to the committee the final policies and procedures for applying for funding. Did you get all that?
Yes.
Great. All right.
Also, Mr. Chair, on item number 3, the city clerk just wanted to clarify that the CSBG award is related to 2015 and not 2013 as indicated on the agenda.
Correct.
And also for item number 2, regarding the HOPWA grant funding adopted budget recommendation, the city clerk respectfully requests the committee to take the action as receive and file rather than note and file.
Correct. Thank you for those corrections. Anything else here? We're good to go? All right. And now, we have general public comment. And so we have Harry Brown, Heigo, and Daisy Garcia, friends from 1LA, with us today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good afternoon, council members. My name is Daisy Garcia, and I'm one of 8 leader at St. Thomas the Apostle Church. St. Thomas is dues-paying member institution in Council District Number 1. Chairman Cedillo. Last year, we held actions with candidates of supervisors at Mary Immaculate Church in Pacoima, with Dr. Mitch Katz, head of LA County DHS at the Precious Blood Church in Westlake, and at the Board of Supervisors last May when 700 1LA leaders attended the board meeting to win an expansion of My Health LA program. Today, our small delegation is here because we want you to know we are beginning to focus on the housing crisis in the city of Los Angeles. Many of our member institutions are in the areas that have been hit hard by rising rents. Condominium conversions, luxury developments in our interest and the interest of our institution to slow down the displacement. You know and we know that we cannot fix this problem by yourselves. That's why we are interested in a strategic relationship. 1LA has proven we're able to educate and organize across the city and county, near downtown, San Fernando Valley, South LA, and on the west side. Chairman Cedillo, we look forward to working with you in the coming months. Please expect to hear from us soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Harry Brown Hegel. I'm a leader at St. Agnes Church, which is a dues-paying member of 1LA and has overlap in Districts 1 and 8. Today you were discussing the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and Cap and Trade funds. We acknowledge that these are really important, and we don't want rent stabilization to get left out, and we have some examples of being left out. It remains a really important issue for us along with the other issues. Last year, an investor purchased a 53-unit rent-stabilized building 1 block from a 1LA member church. Within 1 month, the investor began an active campaign to empty the building of working-class tenants using harassment, threats of major rent increases. By the time we heard about it, dozens of the tenants had already left, and since then, many have left, despite access to legal representation and aid attorneys. The most disturbing part is that the housing department, which is in charge of rent stabilization ordinance, as you know, had no idea of what was happening. We had to educate them. We found out because our friends weren't coming to meetings that we usually saw them at. That's not good. Every year, the housing department collects approximately $14 million in RSO registration fees, $135 of which is mine. Yet it has no mechanism, and I've tried. It has no mechanism to keep track of rents, vacancies, and displacements. The rent stabilization ordinance is a really, really good idea. But without the tools to enforce it, it is merely symbolic. Santa Monica and other cities, which require things like landlords to report when their apartments are vacant, provide examples of reform. I'm a retired social worker. 2 weeks ago, I got a cold call from a major real estate company. A cold call, not my initiative. telling me that gentrification is happening in your neighborhood, and would I like an interview with that person to see whether my property could be evaluated to participate in this? That ain't good for community. We're not talking about just gentrification. We're talking about flipping houses. We're talking about flipping communities. My community. And I've got a 35-year investment in my community. Next year, we will probably see the passage of Measure R2, when LA is certainly willing to propose support for that. But unless we need teeth in the RSO, it just got to happen. To be prepared, our rent stabilization ordinance must be effective, first line of defense for families in our communities. Without it, we will lose housing for working class families much faster than we can create or even preserve it. I go to church every Sunday, and people are missing. And it takes 4 or 5 conversations, you find out, well, they had to move because they got notice. It's not good. Chairman Cedillo, please expect to hear from us. We want to be on your side, being on our side, working together for the great city of Los Angeles. Council members Price and Fuentes, we look forward to working with you in the coming months, and I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
¿Algo más?
That clears the desk.
No other items?
Not here.
Public comment taken care of? Questions, comments? Words of goodwill? Okay, the motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved. Meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Chairman.